What happened at work that made everyone quit at once? Worked at a chain pizza place. The manager didn't approve of how well we cleaned and prepped for the next day. So we all came into a note saying something to the effect of "you are all replaceable," so we all said okay, took off the uniform and left. We didn't even lock up or close up shop. Just walked off. Phones were ringing for orders. There were people coming into the dining area but nobody was there working. Once she realized nobody was there, she was calling everyone, going nuts, telling us to come to work or we're fired. One person went back and tried to save it. I just reminded her that I was replaceable, and so was the person who signed my check. They hung up. They had to close for about a week or two to replace the staff. Location completely closed and filed bankruptcy less than a year later, at least partly due to her leadership. The location is a Verizon store now. I worked at a bakery a while back, and while enjoyable at times, it was generally a nightmare. There was one highlight though, and that was our second manager. We had 3 managers and the first and third were okay, but never really motivated people and at times could be very rude. Our second manager, however, was amazing. She was always encouraging, kind, understanding, and I never heard her get angry. She was the type of person who was meant to be a leader, and she did her job well. Too well. Corporate decided to transfer her to another location since that one was failing, and pretty much everyone quit the moment we found out she was leaving. She was the glue that held us together, and I still remember her as one of the best bosses I've ever had. Worked in a call center offering free public transport brochures to people living in a city. The place was poorly managed. It was contracted out by the local government and only cared about numbers. Earlier in one shift, a spate of bombings on public transport killed a load of people around the city. After a few calls of getting abuse from people aghast we were trying to get their details to send them bus, train timetables, etc., we electively stopped making calls. We assumed management would pause the project for that week at least, maybe longer, out of respect for what had happened. Our manager put her foot down and told us we must continue calling that morning, and as we're only on temporary contracts, anyone who refused may face being replaced. Then she stormed off. The entire team quit on the spot. We just got up and left without speaking to her again. We called up the work agency to let them know and they did not blame us. We were all replaced, but the local government office heard what had happened and pulled the plug on the contract with that call center within a month. Not my work, but close friends. Restaurant owner wasn't paying his staff and checks kept bouncing. So one night, they all said this, closed up shop together and left. Then a god ran out of town after social media and reg media took over. He closed down both of his places. The second also had a staff walkout the week prior to the first, and sold the buildings. Smallish company with a very necessary programming team of 5 people. CEO spent several $100,000 repainting and refurbishing the building, deciding he didn't like the color, and got it redone in the same month. Then lockdown hit and the company was suddenly struggling for money. CEO decided to retrench 2 of our team members. At first we thought that he picked those 2 because they were less familiar with the systems. But then the other 3 of us were told by the CEO that those 2 were in the most rough positions financially, and one was expecting another kid in a few weeks. And that this meant that they could hire them back as contractors for cheap because they'd be desperate. In the next week the 3 of us chatted among ourselves, all resigned, and they had to keep the other 2 devs on with their standard paycheck for longer. All are looking for new places to work. COVID hit the FedEx supply chain. Broke the entire system and exposed bad management. The pressure fell on top of the drivers. We quit one after another. Worked at a cheap clothing retail store while I was in college. 15-20 HRS week for the first several months, as most of the staff. Then we got a new manager who decided that the state mandated paid breaks, 15 minutes after 4 hours, were a waste of money. So he changed everyone's shifts to 3 hours 45 minutes or less so no one would get a paid break. Then people complained. So he hired a bunch of new people and reduced the old staff to about 1 shift a week. Lost pretty much everyone who actually knew what they were doing in less than a month. I heard most of the new people also quit pretty quickly, once they figured out how dumbly the place was run.